Now, over the weekend, Rishi Sunak announced plans to bring back mandatory military service for 18-year-olds. It's a huge talking point at the front of all our newspapers. You can't avoid it. It's part of his election pledge. This would mean that young people would have to spend a year in the military or do volunteer work on weekends. So, big talking point. What do you think of this? Is it a good way to discipline young adults, or is it complete nonsense? Has it been scrawled out on the back of a fag packet over the last couple of weeks? Do you believe a word any of them are saying? Will it ever happen? Will they be in government? So many questions. So it's a good job I have got a brilliant panel with me. Daniel Moylan, I'm going to come to you first. Now, I know you're not representing the Conservative Party at all, in any way, shape or form. You are just being Daniel. I just want you to be Daniel, right? OK, this show is not all about heavy politics. It's about having an opinion and having some fun. So, Daniel, this national service, what do you make of it?
Well, before I come to that, can I just say I love all this election stuff because this is democracy in the raw. This is the privilege that we have fought for over so many generations. And because of Brexit, this is the first general election in decades.
Hold on, Daniel. You mentioned the B word within 10 minutes.
No one can hide behind the European Union. Every one of these politicians who's canvassing for your votes from every party, they have to take full responsibility for what they're saying because they're going to be governing the country and they won't be able to hide behind European Union laws. It is real democracy for the British people. I really hope everyone takes part. I know it can be a bit boring having it on the telly every night, but it's really, really important. Now, when we come to national service or whatever it's being called...
Yeah, I think the name's probably wrong,
there are good and bad things about this. I think it is true that a lot of kids nowadays suffer from isolation. They aren't sufficiently involved in what's going on. And I think the idea that they might do something in the community is a good idea. Whether it's mandatory, compulsory, how you manage that, that's all a little bit more difficult. I do think, and I saw a troop of scouts only at the weekend, I do think you need to think about this at an earlier stage in their life. I don't think it's good enough to say, children should be involved with the community starting at 18. There are other things they can do, other things that can be encouraged for kids to get more involved in social-type activities, whether in an organised way or not. And I think we should be encouraging all that. And if we see this really as part of a bigger spectrum of trying to involve kids in social activity and community activity throughout their young lives, then I think there could be a lot of positives about
it. The confusion I have with this one, Zoe, is it's like, on one hand it was mandatory, they have to do it, and then on the other hand it was like, no, it's not that mandatory. I mean, it's either is or it isn't, and no one's quite explained what happens to kids if they don't go and do this. What has been accused at the moment is that Conservatives hate young people, basically. You are a young person, very gorgeous young person, but you are young. We've got, on one hand, we've got Keir Starmer going, right, votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, we love young people, vote for us. On the other hand, you've got Rishi Sunak saying, we're going to force all 18-year-olds to go and do either military service or go and, I don't know, clean up the local high street or something at the weekend. What do you make of it as a young person?
Well, I think it's a strange move from the Conservatives, and I think what it really shows is that this is a party that it's trying to stem the bleeding and stem the losses, because we know the Conservative Party is hemorrhaging young votes. This is partly to do with their response to the housing crisis. It's partly to do with their economic plans, things on taxation, policies like that. But to choose a policy that targets young people, that many young people will not like and will be opposed to, just shows you that they've given up trying to win back young votes. And at this point, they're trying to go for that over 65 vote, the sort of group that look at the younger generation and say, I don't think they're doing their bit for society in the way that my parents did, in the way that I feel I did. But my problem with this is, I think the Conservatives have recognised something, which is that young people feel isolated from their community. They spend a lot of time online. They don't feel like they have, a stake in the world at the minute. But rather than doing something that is compulsory and sort of standing over them with a stick and saying, you have to do this, otherwise you could be in big trouble, why not offer them something that empowers them? Why not say, this is a great opportunity, we're going to put money into it. You can go travel abroad with the military, you can do this.
Good point.
And it's not compulsory, but we would love you to do it, and there will be great benefits from doing it. That, to me, seems like a much wiser, fairer and kinder idea than introducing these policies that's just going to make them feel like, why are you picking on us? We've had a rough time of it. We can't afford housing, our schools are crumbling, we stayed inside for 2 years to protect the older generation during COVID. I just think it's not kind politics, and it's not politics that's going to inspire young people and make them feel connected.
That's a good point, though, isn't it, Daniel? It's like, back in the day when we were younger, the armed forces used to be told, travel the world, learn a trade. They didn't mention the going and get killed bit, but they were selling the positive points of it. Maybe if it was more carrot and less stick, this policy wouldn't have caused so much knockback. I mean, it's got a hell of a lot of criticism, not least from very many Conservative Party MPs themselves.
Well, it's got a lot of support, actually, and there are one or two Conservative Party MPs who've come out against it. And I have every respect for Steve Baker, and I also respect the fact that Steve Baker served himself in the military. He was
of course, yes.
Professional airman before he went into the world of... he then went into computers, I think, and then became an MP. So I've got a lot of respect for him for that. He knows what he's talking about when he talks about the military. But it's interesting that Zoe doesn't really disagree with the policy. She's just thinking about how it's presented. It could have been presented in a more gentle way. So I think there are legs on this, and the fact that the government has said they're going to set up a royal commission of some sort that's going to work out the details probably is a sensible way of approaching it, because details do need to be worked out. But I do come back to this point that I think there is something to be said for, in a kind way, there is something to be said to try and help many young people. I think we might be talking later about the fact that an awful lot of young people are being medicated for so-called mental health conditions. A lot of young people who would be happier if they had better links with the community, and nowadays they're much more isolated, and it's not just because they spend time online. It's partly because they're not allowed to go out and play in the street. They can't take a bus on their own. They have to be sat on the tube so that they don't fall over, the poor things, and so on. Nothing like the way we were brought up, which was much more
it's interesting.
with other children. And, we were expected, if we fell over, to bounce, which is what
both of you have mentioned the generation divide here, and I don't know about either of you, but I feel like the generation gap has never been wider. Zoe, you alluded to the fact that the older generations are looking at young folk and think, you're not pulling your weight, you're not doing what we used to do when we were younger, you've been wrapped up in cotton wool, you're snowflakes, to borrow that old phrase. I mean, do you feel that younger generations are treated with a bit of contempt by the older generations?
I do, actually, and I think it's really unfair. I think especially, and I'll go back to this point, during COVID, young people stayed inside. They lost valuable... When you're young, every year is very valuable for your development. Some people lost really valuable years where they could have been making connections. People who... I feel really bad for young people who went to university and spent the first 2 years of freedom and that period of their life locked indoors, to protect their grandparents, to protect the older generation. And I feel like we spoke a lot about that public sacrifice at the time. But since then, the Conservative government have kind of introduced these policies that aren't really listening to what young people want. I think there's been some interesting points made about smartphones and the impact that's having on young people's mental health. But I would like to see more policy made talking to young people and understanding what it is they want. Because I think... And there's a real issue here. If you treat a generation with contempt, or you talk to a generation as if they have nothing to offer, they'll start to internalise that and believe it. And I actually think, we have an ageing population. More and more older generations are going to be depending on younger generations for care. We need to bring politics together. We need to bring those generations together. Talk about the ways that they can help each other, not widen that generational divide. And I do worry that Sunak, because he's out of ideas, is kind of leaning into that, trying to draw a bit of a wedge in order to spark up voters to vote for him, rather than to actually think of what is constructive and helpful policy. How can we bring those generations together and think about how holistically that can be beneficial for the social care sector, the health sector, education, all those things. Young people have a lot to offer, and I find the way they're spoken about by some politicians quite unpleasant, really.
Just one final quick point. I'm running out of time on this one, Daniel. Do you think there is that resentment between the generations more so than there had been in previous generations?
There's nothing new about the generation.
No, but I just feel like it's
I'll just tell you, there was a German poet called Walter von der Vogelweide who, in his old age,
I'm so glad you said that.
wrote a poem about young people, how they didn't know how to dress anymore, they didn't know how to behave, they didn't know how to enjoy themselves properly. That was written in 1200. And they're absolutely, roughly 1200, and then absolutely nothing new about the generational divide. The old have always thought the young don't know how to live life, and the young have always resented the fact that the old somehow seem to be comfortable and they're having to struggle. It's always been the case.
Well, there you go. 13th century? 13th century literature for you on a bank holiday Monday.
In German.
Who knew we'd go down that particular route?
I could even quote from it.
No. Oh, God, we're running out of time. Oh, no, what a shame.